Elly De La Cruz leads the league in errors, yet he's one of the best defenders in the league. He also leads the league in strikeouts, yet is one of the best offensive players in the league. How does that make sense? How is that even possible? How can a player who can't make routine plays be considered a good defender? How can a player that can't put a ball in play be considered a good hitter? These are just contradictions in themselves, right? It doesn't quite add up. And this confusion leads to a lot of disagreement and differing opinions. Some people will say that he's one of the best players in all of Major League Baseball, while others will say he's one of the worst. As a result, he has become one of the most polarizing players in the history of the sport. And it's not just an opinion thing. As I said, the statistics also disagree. But, of course, some statistics are better than others, and that is what I'm here to address today. How can Elly De La Cruz have these glaring flaws yet be considered a superstar in today's league? By the way, if you enjoyed the video, I would greatly appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. It's completely free, and you can always unsubscribe at any time. One of the biggest reasons for this polarization is the defense that Elly plays at shortstop. Look at this graph that shows all qualified shortstops in 2024 and how many errors that they have committed. Elly De La Cruz has a commanding lead, currently standing at 28. That 28 mark not only leads all shortstops, but it also leads all players in general in 2024. And when you look at fielding percentage, he is the third lowest in all of Major League Baseball. Isaac Paredes and Oneil Cruz are the only two to have a worse fielding percentage. This means that Elly has been missing a lot of routine plays on defense, and this is a problem that Elly has had ever since he debuted in the majors. Since 2000, among shortstops with at least 1,500 innings, De La Cruz has the lowest fielding percentage at nearly 95%, and he has the lead by quite a large margin, as Tim Anderson has the second lowest, sitting just above 96%. So, after showing you these numbers, you might expect me to say that Elly is not a good defender at all, but not only is he just not a bad defender, he's actually one of the best in the league. The biggest fault in this argument that Elly De La Cruz is a bad defender is in the types of stats that are being used. Errors are a pretty useless stat when it comes to evaluating defense in modern Major League Baseball. The official definition of an error is weird in of itself. A fielder is given an error if, in the judgment of the official scorer, he fails to convert an out on a play that an average fielder should have made. That definition is very loose. What is considered to be an average fielder? What plays does an average fielder make? Ultimately, it comes down to a single person's judgment, that person being the official scorer. Recently, there's been some talk about this definition of an error. Take a look at this graph that shows the amount of errors per game league-wide every single year. You can see that it has declined massively since the stats started being recorded in the 1800s. If we zoom in just to the 2000s though, we can see that it's also been declining in this time span as well. In 2000, there was an average of 0.71 errors per game. In 2023 though, there's an average of just 0.52. That is over a 25% decrease in under 25 years. There could be two explanations to this trend. Either defenders are committing significantly less errors, or that official scorers are being more generous towards the offense, calling borderline plays hits rather than errors. This has led to quite a bit of discussion in recent times. AJ Hinch, the manager of the Tigers, said there's largely been some inconsistencies with what's an error and what's a hit across the sport. Yes Network broadcaster Michael Kay said, "I believe that some of the balls that are hit that are called hits are clear errors." Now, to find the true cause of this decline in errors, I would need to do a lot more research and analysis, but it's pretty clear. The definition of an error is up in the air. It's one thing to disagree on the interpretation or use of a statistic, but if there's questions on its own definition, I have a hard time using that stat to evaluate a player. Errors aren't an objective measure, which is one of the key qualities of a good statistic. That is not the only flaw that errors have. The more range a player has, the more balls that a player can make a play on. Players with more range can make much harder plays, but if they fail to make these plays, it still counts as an error. The opposite is true for players with less range. For example, Philadelphia Phillies outfielder Nick Castellanos went on a 414-game errorless streak, which was largely a result of his very poor range in the outfield. Less range equals less hard plays and plays in general, which means less opportunity for errors. Errors also fail to take into account the great plays that defenders make on defense. It counts failed opportunities that an average fielder would have made, but it doesn't count the successful plays that an average fielder wouldn't have made. This brings up a good question. What is more valuable, a player that makes all the routine plays but doesn't make the great ones, or a player that can make the great ones but miss a few routine plays? Fortunately, we don't have to answer this question with just pure conjecture. We have the numbers and the data that tell us the answer to this question. What number should we be looking at? And more importantly, what did they say about Elly? To answer this question, we have to look at another question. What really makes a player good on defense? Pretty simply, a good defensive player will make a lot of good plays on defense, and with modern technology, we can determine just how good a play was using positional data. Since 2016, StatCast has been tracking this data for players on defense. With these numbers, we can calculate how many outs a player makes compared to the average player, which is measured in outs above average. How does this work? Elly De La Cruz starts here on the play. Say the ball is hit on the ground to his left and he goes over to make a play on it. He catches the ball here, which is referred to as the intercept point. We measure two numbers here, the distance between the start position and the intercept point and the time he took to get there. As you might imagine, the farther the intercept point is away from the defender, the harder the play is going to be. Then at the intercept point, we pause time. We measure how far the runner is from the base that he's heading to, in this case that's first base, and we also measure the average sprint speed of that runner. Lastly, the distance from the defender to the target base is measured. Using these 5 values, we can calculate the expected success rate for an average defender in these situations. For example, let's say that it was an easy play, one with a 98% success rate. The ball was hit right to him, he had plenty of time to make the play, and the runner was pretty slow. If Elly makes this play, he will not get much in the outs above average department since it's expected that he makes this play. If he misses it, however, then he will be punished heavily. But if it's a hard play, a play with a, say, 10% success rate, it's much different. If he makes this play, he will gain a lot more towards outs above average than the play that had a 98% success rate. OAA does a good job at rewarding players for making tough defensive plays while also punishing players for missing easy ones. It's not a perfect stat, but to me, it's the best that we have to work with when it comes to defense. And it's infinitely better than just using errors and fielding percentage. The big question, of course, is what does it say about Elly? In 2024, De La Cruz has 14 outs above average, which is the 7th most amongst all infielders. This means despite the amount of errors that he's been credited with, the great plays that he makes make up for the bad ones and then some. These defensive metrics give us a much clearer and more accurate picture of how valuable a player is on that side of the ball. While some people may point to the errors and low fielding percentage and say that Elly is a bad defender, he's actually the opposite. If you watch the highlight reel, you'll see why. He makes plays that many shortstops can't. A stat like OAA takes these plays into account rather than just focusing on the negative plays. The difference between the more traditional stats and the advanced metrics is one of the key reasons that we see such a polarization in the stats and opinions. The old school fan might say he's not a good defender as they typically value the subpar measures like errors and fielding percentages compared to a modern fan who values the advanced numbers like OAA. But the story is far from over. When we look at the offensive side, it might be even worse. Let's take a look at the strikeout leaders in 2024. As you might notice, number 1 has a sizable gap on the rest of the league, sitting at 201. The second most belongs to Ezequiel Tovar with 186. As you might expect, that number 1 spot belongs to Elly De La Cruz. Obviously, this isn't the best thing to see when you're talking about a good hitter. When we take a look at strikeout rate, Elly claims the 4th highest rate amongst qualified players in 2024. Some people might see this and say, well, if he leads the league in strikeouts, then he can't be a good hitter. A decent amount of people have this opinion about him. He strikes out too much, he needs to put the ball in play more. You see, if a hitter strikes out 31% of the time like Elly does, then you can't automatically assume that the remaining 69% is bad. The outcomes of an at-bat can be represented in this chart. Yes, 31% of the time, it's a strikeout, which is an automatic out, but that doesn't give you the full picture. You need to look at what happens in this other 69%. How much is he getting on base, and what kind of contact is he making? Just looking at the number of strikeouts and saying someone strikes out too much is not a good way to evaluate a hitter. Just because a player strikes out a lot doesn't mean that player's a bad hitter, and vice versa. If a player makes a lot of contact and doesn't strike out, it doesn't mean that player's automatically a good hitter. We need to go deeper. De La Cruz has an average exit velocity of 92 miles per hour, which is in the 90th percentile. So when he does make contact, it often is hard contact. This hard contact will of course result in more home runs and more extra base hits. These outcomes are the most valuable outcomes that plate appearance can have. He has a WRC plus of 120, which means he's been 20% more productive than the average hitter despite all the strikeouts. This can be traced back to 2 key points. We already talked about the power, but the biggest one is the discipline. In 2023, Elly posted an 8.2% walk rate and a 33% chase rate. These numbers were both pretty mediocre, 46th percentile and 24th percentile respectively. In 2024, we've seen a huge increase in both of these numbers. He's now walking at a 10.5% clip and chasing only 26% of the time. These are much better, in the 77th and 63rd percentile. A big problem that Elly had in 2023 was the inconsistency at the plate. One month he would be one of the most exciting players in the league, and the next month he would be the opposite. This year it's been a different story, and the biggest reason for that is the discipline and the swing decisions. When you chase balls out of the zone, that's going to lead to a lot more strikeouts and more weak contact. Now, he's taking those pitches and working walks and getting himself into better counts, which is giving him better pitches to hit. A lot of the best hitters in the league take this approach, power hitting and discipline. This will lead to the most valuable outcomes of a plate appearance. It's a big reason why we've seen such a rise in strikeouts over the past few years, because it just doesn't matter as long as you hit the ball hard and get on base, like Elly has done. This improved hitting is not the only way he makes an impact on offense though, because once he gets on the bases, you better watch out. An often overlooked and undervalued part of the game is base running, and oh boy, is Elly De La Cruz good at it. Not only is he one of the fastest players in the league in terms of sprint speed, he also is a smart, aggressive, and elite base runner. Give me another player who can score from second on a routine failed pickoff attempt. I'll wait. Since he debuted in 2023, nobody has stolen more bases than Elly with 99, but base running is far from just stolen bases. This is the part that people don't often think about. Taking extra bases on balls in play leads to more runs being scored. A stat that measures this is base running runs above average. This tells us how many runs approximately a player has created just on the base paths compared to the average base runner. Since making his debut, there has only been one player with more base running runs than Elly De La Cruz, and that's Corbin Carroll. Essentially, he's created 14 additional runs with his base running alone. That's just as valuable as a player who produces 14 runs at the plate. This is a huge part of the game that people often don't realize can actually make a big difference for both a team's success and a player's value. His base running adds to his overall offensive output, and he's already an above average hitter, so when you look at these two together, he's one of the best offensive players in the league. Elly De La Cruz is just 22 years old. In 2024 so far, he's put up an F-WAR of 6.1. When you combine his above-average hitting, his elite defense, and his elite base running, you get an overall very valuable player. There are only two players in the National League that have been more valuable, Shohei Ohtani and Francisco Lindor. Most likely, De La Cruz is going to be pulling in some top 3 MVP votes when we get to that time. I don't think people realize that these are superstar-type numbers for a 22-year-old. We've already seen him make improvements in his plate discipline and his swing decisions, which has led him to be a much more productive player on offense. Sure, he makes errors, he strikes out a lot, but when you look deeper into the advanced metrics, his elite defense, his power hitting, and remarkable base running, it makes him a true standout. It's easy to see why opinions are so divided, but one thing is clear. The numbers show that Elly is already one of the best young stars in the game, and his future is looking brighter than ever. Thanks for watching, subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.